A very good morning to you all. You're watching World News and I'm your host, Klaudia Czerwińska. Back and forth strikes continued overnight between Israel and Iran. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced that the military's objective is to strike all of Iran's nuclear facilities. Iran, meanwhile, plans to attack the offices of Channel 14 news station, which it accuses of being Netanyahu's propaganda channel. This all comes ahead of European talks with Iran over its nuclear program. So let's continue. The foreign ministers of 9 EU countries are asking the European Commission to limit the bloc's trade with Israeli settlements in the occupied territories. Poland's Radosław Sikorski and 8 other foreign ministers wrote to the Commission on Thursday calling for action. In a letter to EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas, the foreign representative said they cannot recognize as legal the unlawful Israeli presence in the occupied territories. The request was based on an advisory opinion issued by the International Court of Justice in July last year. The 9 states said they cannot support the unlawful Israeli presence in the occupied territories through trade and investment. There is still time to reach a diplomatic solution with Tehran, British Foreign Secretary David Lammy said on the eve of European talks with Iran over its nuclear program. Lammy made the statement following a meeting with high-level U.S. officials. Lammy met with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff at the White House on Thursday to discuss, quote, how Iran must make a deal to avoid a deepening conflict. The gathering in Washington was held before talks with Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi alongside his French, German, and EU counterparts in Geneva on Friday. The 2 meetings come as European countries call for de-escalation in the face of Israel's bombing campaign against Iran's nuclear program, and as U.S. President Donald Trump weighs up whether or not to join the strikes against Iran. Speculation about whether Washington will join Israel's war with Iran has taken over international media, answering concerns or perhaps extending the gut-wrenching weight U.S. President Donald Trump recently said, quote, I will make my decision whether or not to go within the next 2 weeks.
There has been a lot of speculation amongst all of you in the media regarding the president's decision-making and whether or not the United States will be directly involved. In light of that news, I have a message directly from the president, and I quote, based on the fact that there's a substantial chance of negotiations that may or may not take place with Iran in the near future, I will make my decision whether or not to go within the next 2 weeks. That's a quote directly from the president for all of you today.
Things may come to a head more quickly than Donald Trump anticipates, said Stephen Moore, founder of the Ukraine Freedom Project, in an exclusive interview with TVP World, referring to U.S. President Donald Trump's comments about whether Washington will join Israel's war with Iran.
I don't think Donald Trump's setting the timeline for this. The Israelis and the Iranians are shooting back and forth at each other. I'm here in Kyiv, I'm very familiar with the sound of Iranian Shahed drones because the Russians shoot hundreds of them into Kyiv most nights every week. And now the Israelis are seeing that coming at them. The Russians perfect that technology here in Ukraine and now are using that. The Iranians are using those drones against the Israelis. So there's a lot going on, and things may come to a head more quickly than Donald Trump anticipates.
Continuing on the subject of Donald Trump's reaction to the escalation in the Middle East, quote, we know that he's highly unpredictable and we just don't know how he's going to react, said Melanie Sully, a political consultant and lecturer, in a recent interview with TVP World when asked about the POTUS's next decision regarding Iran. Here's more on what she had to say.
He's sort of saying, well, I may not bomb. I may do. I just don't know, really. And nobody else seems to know either. So there's a lot of speculation, which he then says that's false. The Israelis have done quite a lot of the heavy lifting in weakening Iran, but they need a knockout blow. And a knockout blow to devastate the underground nuclear facilities in Iran can only be provided by the US. So this is the key to the whole thing of destroying Iran's nuclear war program lies in Washington. And of course, Trump has to weigh up a lot of things because in his election campaign, He said, no way am I going to get involved in the Middle East in any wartime capacity. That's the mistake a lot of other presidents have made. I'm not going to make it. And if he did use these bunker blasting bombs, would they work? Because these bunkers were built exactly by Iran with the intention of withstanding such an onslaught. And if they didn't work, then Washington would look a bit silly.
A missile struck near the European Union delegation in Tel Aviv during an Iranian attack on the city. All EU staff are reported to be safe. The missile hit about 400 to 500 meters from the EU office, according to media reports. Their area is home to several European embassies, including those in the Netherlands, Belgium, Austria, North Macedonia and Ireland. The incident happened a day before EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas is expected to travel to Geneva for talks with her Iranian counterpart. And so you're watching World News here on TVP World live from Warsaw. I'll be keeping you updated on the situation in the Middle East, particularly how it affects Central and Eastern Europe. But now let's take a look at the latest developments. Now for a back and forth in Budapest, Hungarian police have banned the 2025 Pride March under a new law pushed by Prime Minister Viktor Orban's government, citing the protection of children. However, Budapest's Liberal mayor has rejected the ban. Despite the legal standoff, tens of thousands are expected to attend the LGBTQ+ celebration on June 28th. What happens next is still an open question.
The Hungarian police made its decision. The Budapest Pride Parade is banned. But the mayor of Budapest, Gergely Karacsony, says the city did not apply for any permits, therefore the ban has no validity.
The Budapest police headquarters issued a ban on a non-existent assembly, and with that power, they could have banned a march of unicorns. The metropolitan municipality will host the Budapest Pride Freedom Celebration as a municipal event on June 28th, the Hungarian Day of Freedom. Full stop.
The current standoff between Budapest's local and national government is the result of a law passed in March, which allows the police to ban public events organized by the LGBTQ community, citing protection of children. The move sparked protests in Hungary, and together with another law targeting foreign-funded NGOs, led the European Commission to meet on Wednesday to debate whether Budapest is breaching EU laws.
We have been very clear where we stand on it and have underlined our willingness to act as a Commission to protect EU law and to protect fundamental freedoms and protect the fundamental rights of European citizens, including Hungarian citizens.
There is no such thing in Hungary as a pride ban. Today's hearing will allow me the opportunity to explain to my colleagues the constitutional and the legal framework.
Hungarian activists and journalists, however, believe the pride ban is real and that it could be even more dangerous than it sounds.
They can apply that law to any kind of organization, and they can ban any kind of demonstration if they want.
Will the Hungarian queer community get to celebrate Pride Month this year? The mayor of Budapest is willing to fight for the right to exercise the freedom of assembly, regardless of policies set by the government led by Viktor Orban.
In this city, there are no first or second-class citizens. In this city, we know that we can only be free together. So in this city, neither freedom nor love can be banned, and the Budapest Pride cannot be banned either.
For TVP World, Natalia Komarov.
Even after Russia's invasion of Ukraine ends, Moscow will remain a threat to the wider West, said Interior Minister of Baltic and Nordic countries, as well as Poland, represented by Minister Tomasz Siemoniak during a meeting in Tallinn, Estonia. The ministers argued EU borders need a strong drone force to act as a deterrent to secure them properly. The ministers also proposed imposing a visa ban for veterans of the Russia-Ukraine war who choose to stand on the side of Moscow to further secure the EU Schengen zone. This proposition is reminiscent of last year when EU member states clashed with Hungary over its visa scheme that allowed Russian citizens to stay in Hungary and move freely inside the Schengen zone. The interior ministers of the 7 European countries bordering Russia have also called for modernization of border guard infrastructure in their countries. Another prisoner exchange within the framework of the latest agreement reached in Istanbul in early June took place between Ukraine and Russia on Thursday. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced the news on his social media.
Our people are returning home from Russian captivity. These are warriors of the armed forces, the National Guard, and the State Border Guard Service. Most of them had been held captive since 2022. They are defenders of Ukraine who fought in the Donetsk, Zaporizhia, Luhansk, Kharkiv, Sumy, Chernihiv, and Kiev regions. We are working to bring our people back. I thank everyone who helps make these exchanges possible. Our goal is to free every single one of them.
The issue of Ukraine is becoming very toxic for Trump personally, said Vitaly Rishko, Ukraine program coordinator at the Global Governance Institute, in an interview with TVP World. He was referring to the unstable U.S. relationship with Ukraine and the significant importance of the upcoming NATO summit in The Hague for the EU and NATO allies.
The relationship between the two is not really good one. And also, judging by all the efforts of the US administration to actually promote the peace talks, I think that the issue of Ukraine is becoming actually very, very toxic to Trump personally and to the US in general, because, it does cause certain harm to his image, because if we remember all his claims that he is going to be a great peacemaker, and we see that it doesn't work. And it doesn't work because he is not willing to use all the leverage and power that the US has over Russia.
In a letter to NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, Spain asked NATO if it could opt out of increasing its defense spending to 5% of GDP. This, according to experts, could derail the upcoming NATO summit in The Hague, which aims to raise defense spending across the alliance, as all 32 NATO member states must agree to increase defense spending. In the letter, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez asked Rutte to adopt a more flexible formula that either makes the spending target optional or excludes Spain from its application. He argued that, quote, committing to a 5% target would not only be unreasonable but also counterproductive, as it would move Spain further away from optimal spending and would hinder the EU's ongoing efforts to strengthen its security and defense ecosystem, end quote. This row follows months of NATO leaders calling for increased defense spending, with the loudest calls coming from Washington, as U.S. President Donald Trump said he wouldn't defend countries that don't spend at least 5% of GDP on defense. The AX-4 mission, with Polish astronaut Sławosz Uznański-Wiśniewski aboard, will no longer launch on Sunday, June 22nd, with a new date to be announced in the coming days, according to the International Space Center. This is the 7th delay in liftoff because of, quote, operational and safety concerns being addressed at the International Space Station. Despite yet another delay, Axiom Space confirmed that the astronauts remain in good health and spirits, with Uznański-Wiśniewski and his fellow crew members continuing their quarantine at Florida's Kennedy Space Center. The window for liftoff is open till June 30th. However, if for some reason the deadline is missed, another opportunity will present itself in mid-July. Once launched, the mission will see Uznański-Wiśniewski become the first Polish astronaut aboard the ISS, where the crew will conduct up to 60 scientific experiments during their 14-day stay.
I think both mountains and sailing.
And so this would be all the latest news for now. Thank you so much for joining. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska, and I hope to see you soon here back on TVP World in a moment.